So welcome to our third session, fourth session, and I think the last one is today, the last part of this conference. And now we are going to another perspective, which is economics. And here we are having two people who are going to speak, which is Elizabeth and myself. And first, I'm going to make, I hope, short introduction to this thing. And then we give the word to Elizabeth, and then I come back regarding these backlashes. And as I said before, we had the schedule change, the program change. So in the last part, we have Swati Parashar, who's going to speak. Again, we come back to conflict and women regarding the case of Kashmir. So let's start. And I wanted to introduce this theme a little bit. I don't know, it was difficult to choose how to do it, but I tried to do it to people who have not gone into this kind of introduction regarding women in economics. So I do a little bit basic, could you say? So first, which are the models of gender division of labor in general, which come from capitalism, which is these changes from capitalism to industrialization and shaping of this nuclear family that we know today, that was shaped through the 19th and 20th century up to now. From putting especially middle classes depending on one person who was going to give financial means for the family to have the income of both men and women later in the 20th century, requiring that up to now. And then the other model was the construction of the socialist model, which Olga perhaps is so familiar with, in which women were massively integrated into the labor markets. But that's, and everything changed also, the development infrastructure, schools, daycare centers, provision of contraceptive, legalized abortion in what we call the Soviet states, or the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, but not for the women benefit. I always try to recall that when I went to the Soviet Union, because once upon a time I was also became specialist on Soviet foreign policy. And when I was there in the end of the 70s, I was shocked by the fact that most women work, but there was extreme patriarchal system, which is still the case today. I mean, so the fact that women work didn't change who took decisions at the family level and at society level. So the next one, please. So we have this massive entrance of women to the labor market in most countries in the world. You have different figures here from Europe, US, Canada, to Mexico, Central America, Middle East, North Africa. During this period of industrialization, especially after the 80s, it's going to be a massive entrance of women into the labor market. Next one. And this table, which was taken from an article that we published together, Marianne Marchand and me, in 2019. And here we see how labor participation rates are from women, female populations ages 15 plus. So you see that especially Central Europe, the Baltics, it diminished, you could say, and that is part of the transition. Mm-hmm. But Europe was more or less, it has also Eastern Europe and Central Asia diminished. In the case of the European Union has gone up, but not too much. But the fact is that most regions in the world have at least half of the female population have gone into this labor market. Of course, we are speaking also about the formal economy, because in the informal economy, we have many more but that's not so sure statistically. The regions that we see less is, for example, Middle East and North Africa, which are very low, according to these statistics. But the rest of the world, you have from 49 to 61 in the case of Sub-Saharan Africa. When I was telling this to my students, everyone was very surprised because you have very high rates in Sub-Saharan Africa. Yes. And that's labor force, the female, as the total labor force. That means men and women. So how for you see 100 men, 45 or 50 women are working from 1990 to 2080. So it's also nearly half of the labor force, you could see, but it's less than the previous chart that we saw. And still we see that the cases of South Asia and Middle East are still very low in 2019. And then we go to the crisis of patriarchalism that says that there are several forces that were implemented, for example, the case of fundamentalists, religious fundamentalists, labor flexibilization, less welfare, that put together with the massive entrance of women to the labor market made labor markets much more precarious. So here, women were the ones that entered last, were facing this kind of very difficult balance between productive and reproductive tasks, especially when infrastructure is lacking, as in many countries in the world. And also this general trend towards flexibilization and precariousness that came with neoliberalism, and that affected most labor markets in the world. So this enormous trend to flexibilization and precariousness, which is affecting extremely much labor markets where women dominate. And the questioning of the welfare system in general, an option for individual solutions, which we can see very clearly in the case of Sweden today. Then, as I said, the individual choice and personal responsibility dismantling the welfare state in many countries, especially when you have the forces of the market. And you see that very clearly with the Trump policies today and the dismantling completely of the state. And also putting this mentality of independence, self-realization that many countries try to strive after. And these redistribution policies that were part of the welfare state are replaced by recognition of multiculturalism and different identities that legitimate also deeper segregation, glorification of that free choice. We see that very clearly in cases of Sweden, especially regarding schools. In the global south, women, with this entrance of women to the labor market, become the reserve labor, and that opens possibilities, but also several challenges, especially in the global south, because we have this economic restructuring from the 80s and the 90s, the fact that in Western consumption patterns, and then we have massive entrance of women, especially to these factories, assembling factories, we call them maquilas in Mexico, that provide inputs of several goods to the United States. And with this entrance, mentalities don't change, as they didn't change in the Soviet Union when women were integrated into labor markets. So gender relations stay much the same, and they are also affected by pornography, violence, objectification of female body, that result in more gender-related violence in many local contexts. And also different ideological factors like religion, nationalism, that are affecting extremely much of this integration into the labor market. Yes? And in a case, one of the best cases I know and most illustrative is maquiladoras, which is assembling factories, the global chain of production, which Trump wants to dismantle, of course, but it's not easy to dismantle because it's so integrated all over the world. And the best example is, again, Mexico with all the border area furnishing thousands and thousands of products that are needed in the chain of production in the United States. And many women are the majority in these low-skilled labor-intensive sectors, and they are also concentrated in lower segments of occupational hierarchies, and they are very vulnerable to individual structural discrimination and abuse and harassment, as we see. Yes, and here is a beautiful example. Maquilapolis, I always put that as my preferred example. It's a documentary that you can find in YouTube. And it's the best example of women telling their stories as factory workers in assembling factories. In the case of Mexico, in the border area, Mexico, the United States. So I really recommend this documentary that is really legendary. I put it to all my students once upon a time in the university. It's absolutely perfect to illustrate this, Maquilapolis. Then, so now we see crisis, conflicts, and austerity. Women have attained this relevant role in the economy, but they face enormous challenges: economic crisis, conflict, questioning of the welfare system, and repercussions in the economic growth of women. We have the ultra-right conservative and natality alerts because many countries are facing the fact that they have less children, to austerity policies that we are going to see afterwards because welfare policies are sacrificed to other priorities, now militarization, defense budgets, for example, as we also will see. So what are the challenges for the feminist movement today regarding economics? To find, I will come back to that, the dynamics behind Beijing+30, which we started to see yesterday, recognize the backlash challenges facing women today and trying to find common strategies regarding transnational intersectional alliances, respect for diversity differences without sacrificing the principles and the conquest that we have, to try to find strategies against these growing conservative ultra-right nationalist groups that especially are focusing on eroding women's rights, and trying to conciliate theory and practice. That's one example of Gadi, which is we try to have this as contribution of Gadi, putting together the efforts of academics and activists, and white plus, of course, and to find alternative models of development, which has to do with climate change and gender challenges there, where both gender, class, ethnicity, divides, hierarchies disappear. So this is my introduction, very quickly, overview. So now I give the word to Elizabeth. Thank you. And Elizabeth is going to go more into the focusing of certain aspects of what I have given today. So please, could you present yourself, because it's better you.
Can I ask?
Yes, yeah, yes.
I think that it's very important to speak about the dilemma with different economical models. And I have a question about what is your opinion about which economical model is the best for women's interest? And is it this, or we should build such kind of model in future? Maybe a little bit provocative question, but for me it's interesting.
I think that it's a very difficult question.
Yeah,
but I think that I'm going to develop more that in the presentation I have, which is after the one that Elizabeth has. So let's wait until then and
Okay.
Thank you.